Christian, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Nice to
How
talk
are
to
you?
you. Nice to talk to you. I'm very well as well. I mean, this sort of confirms my prejudices, I would say, about some of the kind of bedwetting, limp-wristed young people that we have in this country who seem to think that socialism is a good thing, despite the fact that when you ask them what they mean by socialism, all they can say is, well, it's fair, isn't it? It's nice and fair. Everybody has the same things and it's fair. Well, it isn't fair, is it?
No, but that is exactly one of the problems. That's one of the questions actually that we asked in that poll. We asked people, what comes to mind when you hear the word socialism? What are your most common associations with that? And it is exactly words such as fairness, the workers, the public, equal, communal, things like that come to mind. We've also given them the option of naming some real-world examples. We've had Venezuela in there, the former showcase of 21st century socialism, but absolutely or virtually nobody mentions that. And that is part of the problem, that socialism isn't judged by its real-world record.
Right. And so, did they mention the Soviet Union at all? Did they mention, the North Vietnamese communist situation? Did they mention China? What do they talk about?
No, we had a question on that where we asked, do you agree with the following statement? Socialism is a good idea. It just hasn't worked in practice so far because it has been badly done. Right. It hasn't really been tried. And we had 75% agreeing with that statement. So that's why you can't really defeat socialism, because no matter how many times it fails, its fans will always say, yeah, okay, but that wasn't really socialism. That is not what Karl Marx originally had in mind. And apparently that is the mainstream opinion. It may sound like a terrible cliche to us, but it's the mainstream view.
Well, sadly it is, yeah. I mean, these are all the same people that sang Jeremy Corbyn's name at Glastonbury, I'm assuming. That is sort of the sort of slightly overprivileged middle classes who, despite the fact that they have benefited massively from their parents' own capitalism, they think that maybe they should try something else.
Yes, Corbyn's name, unfortunately, also comes up. He is also one of the most common associations with the term socialism, which shows you that this is really a continuation of this Corbynista movement, the Corbyn mania that we saw break out in 2015, and then the Glastonbury chants. And it just shows he is now more of a spiritual leader. He may no longer technically be the leader of the opposition, but he is more a bit like what Kim Il-sung is for North Korea.
Right. So he could be the sort of Islington Dalai Lama, perhaps.
Yes, that combined with a sort of romantic revolutionary figure. Let's say a Dalai Lama combined with a Che Guevara style figure.
And I mean, does anybody have a view on nationalisation in this argument? I mean, do they believe that socialism is not just about making everything fair for everybody, but do they also mean that the workers should own the means of production? Do they also mean that, all corporations in the UK should be nationalised?
Yes, we had a question on that. We didn't explicitly say, do you want everything to be nationalised? But we mentioned some industries as an example. And nationalisation is certainly a big part of it. So this is not people who just think Britain should be a bit more like Denmark or more like Sweden, fluffy, nice social democracy. This is proper socialism. This is about state ownership of the means of production. We had a question on that. And there, our own findings are totally in line with previous polling on this issue. There has been, over the past 5-6 years, there's been plenty of surveys on this. And you always find large majorities in favor of large-scale industry nationalizations. And our poll is just a confirmation of that.
Yes. Although, of course, when it comes to polls, actual polls and general elections and by-elections, none of these socialists and their ideas ever do very well.
Yeah, it could well be that you have a lot of people who sympathize with socialist ideas in principle, but who don't care that strongly about them. So it may not be the thing that that determines their voting behavior. And in fact, what we also find is that we've also presented some pro-capitalist statements on the same subjects, and we often find majority approval for that as well. So meaning that you have lots of people who agree simultaneously with a pro-capitalist statement and with an anti-capitalist statement, two things that are mutually exclusive, and you often get at least 1 in 4 people agreeing with both of them at the same time, not noticing that there is a contradiction here. And this shows that this isn't really a firmly entrenched view. It's more a sort of default opinion, and that could explain why it doesn't automatically translate into voting outcomes.
No, sure. And I mean, I see that one of your findings was that 78% of people you questioned blame capitalism for Britain's housing crisis. And I wonder whether they know even what that housing crisis actually is, or what is causing it, because generally speaking, a lot of young people are driven by a sort of hatred of their inability to buy a house because it's so expensive. And their kind of economic outlook might be tainted by that, so that when they do have enough money to buy a house, they might go back to being a bit more capitalistic, shall we say.
That could be, but unfortunately, that isn't going to happen as long as house prices are what they are, and rent levels as well. And in that particular respect, I have some sympathy with them. I obviously don't think that socialism is the solution to that, but I can see why they would be unhappy about the status quo. And socialists have just been good at milking that, at telling them that if you want to solve the housing crisis, what you need is rent controls, what you need is an expansion of public housing. Now, none of this is true. There's good evidence that shows that it really is about planning restrictions, about the supply side of the housing market. That is the way you have to solve this problem. But that isn't widely known, and that view isn't widely shared. So people do attribute it to capitalism, see this as a market failure, and that drives them further to the left.
Yes, indeed. And also the point about the whole housing sort of situation really is that it's terribly expensive in the southeast of England, but it's not terribly expensive everywhere in the country. In lots of parts of the country, housing is still relatively affordable compared to what people can earn in order to get on with their life. So, I mean, it's a very London-centric thing, this, isn't it?
Yes, unfortunately, it's not limited to London. In fact, if you look at the ratio of house prices to incomes, there is actually Oxford, which is the most expensive place in the country. And it's specifically the most prosperous parts. It's Oxford and Cambridge, it's Bath and Bristol, it's the places where people want to live are the most expensive ones. So it doesn't really help you that there are parts of the country where it isn't that big a problem. Those are the parts of the country that people want to move away from, young people certainly.
So your message from this finding of this study that you've done is that, the capitalists of the world need to pay attention to this and make sure that they don't actually lose sight of the fact that presumably you don't want this movement to grow so big that it becomes a thing.
Yes, that's exactly my motivation here. Mostly addressing people on my own side of the argument, broadly defined, people who think that capitalism isn't such a bad thing and that socialism is overrated. Because I've been writing about this for 5 years or so now. I often get the response from people on my own side who say, well, don't take this too seriously. They will grow out of it. No, that is the big mistake. What I'm showing is that this isn't limited to 18, 19, 20-year-olds. People in their early 40s are still as likely to approve of socialism as people in their late teens or early 20s. So in terms of attitudes to socialism, 40 is the new 20. If somebody hasn't grown out of this by the age of 40, they're not going to grow out of it.
That's terribly tragic, isn't it? What a terrible indictment on our education system and the way that we have created people in this country who are completely and utterly without any form of reality, because, they can't define what they want, except for they want it to be more fair. But if you say to them, all right, well, we'll give you some more of your money and we can give it to that guy over there, suddenly if they've got money, they don't want to do that.
Well, and that's one of the problems, that socialism is usually defined in relatively fluffy terms, even by its own proponents. They don't tell you specifically what I mean by that, how it's going to work. Is all just about, you get people talking about citizens' assemblies and somehow the people jointly managing the economy, but nobody has yet come up with a mechanism for doing that. In a country with 65 million inhabitants, how are you going to run the economy democratically? Are we going to have a Zoom call of all 65 million people where we debate about how much beer we should brew and how much bread we should bake? There's just no way you can run an economy in a democratic way, and that's why it's either going to be a market economy or it's a command and control economy, and there is nothing else.
Yes, well, let's hope that we now get out of the command and control economy that we've had for the last year and look forward to getting back to normal. Dr. Christian Nimitz, thank you very much indeed. head of political economy at the Institute of Economic Affairs.